I love cookies. I love cookies. I love cookies. I love cookies.
Welcome to Cookies, the playoff basketball podcast. I'm Ben Detrick. Andrew Kuo is here. Jordan Redaelli is ailing. How are you feeling, Andrew Kuo?
Pretty awesome. Feel great. The lack of all these basketball games have given me my sleep schedule back a little bit. I'm enjoying the one basketball every game every 2 nights.
Yeah, the schedule was a little weird there when it was just a game a night. When it was the beginning of the two respective conference finals, and it was off on, off on, off on. There was no nights off. I felt like earlier rounds of the playoffs, you could sort of pick and choose, where it was okay, there's 3 good ones tonight, so tomorrow I kind of don't have to watch. But now,
it's
when it was every single night, you felt like you were shirking your duties if you didn't watch basketball one night.
And it was it's that hollow feeling you have after binging a show. And it kind of ends West Coast games end at 2 a.m. over here sometimes, especially when they go to 4 overtimes. And then sometimes when exciting stuff happens, a bad shot from 37 feet go in.
That's a good shot.
I mean, a good shot.
That's the best shot you can get in any situation is
it's the best
step back 37-footer over
in a tie game.
NBA defender.
It's the best
tie game.
Unethical shot you can take.
Just immoral, to be honest.
But it felt that bingey feeling when you watch Netflix shows and you're just I know I'm falling down that wormhole. This is a trap. I'm going to be up for 4 more hours, and you just do it.
Once you've seen one of the 4 new Steve 1989 MRE reviews that dropped within the last couple of weeks, you know you're going to watch all 4.
You're my alert for that guy. Every time he drops one, you send me a text being yo, there's a new one out, man, and there's a new one in the can.
Steve 1989, hot shit, just dripped.
You enjoy YouTube, correct me if I'm wrong, you enjoy YouTube videos
Some YouTube.
more than TV shows.
Yeah.
Why
I
is
can't
that?
watch TV anymore.
Why?
Just watching TV takes too long.
That's true too, but don't you do other stuff? Don't you write? Don't you kick the interns around and make them post stuff on Twitter?
I would love to do that, but they're in their cages.
Don't you rattle them? Don't you hit the cages with sticks?
I'd like throwing dumplings into the cages while they're back there.
Oh.
Peg them in the head with a food product that's easily thrown.
It can go through the bars.
Yeah. There's nothing more embarrassing than throwing something at the intern cage and having it hit the bars and ricochet back out. No one wins. They don't get to feed. You don't get the rewarding thud of a calzone.
Yeah.
Hitting a soft skull.
Well,
By the way, we got very little feedback to contest that calzones are never good. A few people jumped in and said that there are some good calzones. Generally not convincing.
And a lot of people reference the Parks and Rec running joke of calzones as well.
Never watched that show.
It's incredible.
Really?
It's incredible.
It always struck me as for people who kind of liked Family Guy. No?
I would say it's nerdier than... So Family Guy, if I could generalize, would be stoner stuff. And Parks and Rec was comedy nerd stuff.
Interesting, because I always sort of equated the Ron Swanson character to the Family Guy sense of humor and Chuck Norris jokes.
Ron Swanson was one of the best characters on TV. It was incredible. That Parks and Rec was so good. I loved it so much that my wife even gifted me the book, the accompanying book that comes with Parks and Rec. And I'm I don't even like books, but I love this show. And she was well, I thought you would like this. And I do.
She's well, it's a book, but it's about TV. You're ooh, now I like it.
You watch Fleabag?
No.
Will you ever watch Fleabag?
Yes, I heard it's good. Everyone says it's good. It's getting rave reviews across the full spectrum of the internet. Everyone I know likes it.
Yes.
And I'm not intentionally avoiding it or anything, but like Steve, 1989, has some MRE reviews up, and that is my priority right now.
That's true. Can't you walk and chew gum?
No, but what I'm also into is a guy named Badlands Chugs. He's a new YouTube sensation.
But an old celebrity. Like, he's been around for a long time as a competitive eater.
Exactly. Honestly, his videos aren't that great. I'm not really into the average Badlands Chugs video, but he's really great.
I find that
Like,
I'm
he
laughing
is great.
at him a little bit, and I hate that, so I don't watch it that much. When he's like, shout out to Biggie, and he drinks like grape juice, being like one of the greatest. I'm like, I'm no longer laughing with you, so I'm out a little bit.
I know. I could understand that inclination, but I feel like there's a sort of calm sweetness to him where I'm not
Very much so.
laughing at him. I'm more charmed by the stuff he does versus saying, this guy's a clown. Yeah. I'm more like, he seems like a great dude, and it's ridiculous that he thinks drinking 2 gallons of grape juice is something that he should put on the internet and something that he wants to make his calling card. But I'm not mad at him. I'm not mocking him.
So I used to frequent a local pizza shop in the East Village where Eater X used to work at. So in the heyday of like competitive eating, it was like Badlands. Eater X used to paint his face like the Ultimate Warrior, and Kobayashi. This was before I forgot his name. The white guy unseated Kobayashi, and Kobayashi went through all that drama.
And he was the guy who was best known for the Coney Island hot dog contest.
Yeah, he revolutionized the way to eat it, where he soaked the buns in water and then ate 2 hot dogs bunless afterwards, and everyone started copying him. Well, he was great, the Michael Jordan of his era. But I used to talk to Eater X about it when I was eating pizza at his spot. And he was so interesting because he was like, well, it's really bad for me and I'm going to stop soon, but like I eat really healthy. And when I'm going up against like a competition, I'll train really heavily for 2 weeks. And that's kind of grueling. And you can look it up what he does and what all these guys do. But when I see Badlands, I'm just like, oh no. Oh, wait. I think he's just like loves to eat. Like there's a competitive aspect to him where he's just like, oh yeah, watch me consume 4 times as much food as you think I can. But a part of I always use this word, melancholy of his YouTube channel is just like, oh, this is like the way you live your life.
It's definitely melancholy. It's sweet, but it's melancholy.
Yeah.
I've never watched it and said, this guy's hysterical.
Right.
He did a Biggie tribute where he did the Welch's grape T-bone steak from...
Eggs,
right, from... Big Papa, which he incorrectly identified as being from One More Chance.
Yeah.
He then said, Biggie, greatest rapper alive. But I actually was like, I get that.
Yeah.
He meant,
it's all good.
Like, he meant ever. He just used alive as a way to describe someone who's dead. But
Yeah.
But I'm not even making fun of those incorrect elements of his video. To me, he's got a great voice, and he plays kind of like slow jam, quiet storm background music, and he's like, it's Badlands Chugs.
I absolutely want to hang out with him more than Eater X, for sure. Because Eater X seems like a type A kind of dude, big fan too. But Badlands just seems like a chiller. He's awesome. He's very lovable, man.
There's the one video where the guy delivers like a Sonic massive frozen drink, and he gives him like a $20 tip. And everyone's like, wow, he seems awesome. I'm like, I get it. You give someone a $20 tip when you're videotaping it, and you're going to put it up on YouTube.
Hey, all we know is what we know, right?
I was like, no disrespect to Chugs. He might be an incredible tipper, but the idea of, oh, this is going to be viewed by millions of people, of course you tip heavily in that video. And you're the guy walking into the club in fucking Goodfellas when it's going on your YouTube channel.
And to bring it back to Fleabag, this show, I mean, the person who wrote it, stars in it, and created it is just like the worst. She's like a bad person, you know? And the first season was good. And I think we talked about it last episode, but like it was hard for me to watch because there were so many despicable things that happened, like just like family wise, not like world wise, interpersonal family stuff. And then the main character is just like, you're not sure if you like them at all. And the second season was great because however dated, like shout out to Ron Artest, like meta stuff is, it was very meta, but it was done in such a way where it was shocking, where like, no spoilers, halfway through you're like, oh whoa, they just turned this whole thing around. Sort of like, what was I thinking? Like Barry. Have you seen Barry at all?
Yeah.
So, like a complaint could be like the whole theater, the training to be an actor thing is like a little too self-aware.
I didn't enjoy that part of it. It was too much written by a LA screenwriter, actor, in order to incorporate things from their life into a show about
Bill Hader, literally. Like, it was him and Alec Berg, right?
Right, yeah.
And, but the reason I enjoy Barry so much is because I think they managed to bring the two things together, where the characters on stage actually start influencing the story that you're supposed to think is real, but then the whole thing is just like acting. And it's kind of charming in that way. When it works, it works. And Fleabag is just so good. I mean, if you want to, after you're done with Steve 1989, get
I will
Fleabag.
never be done with Steve 1989.
Well, he took a hiatus for like a month once, right?
He took a hiatus for like 3 months, and
Was
I
it
had to
food
go into
poisoning?
I had to go into the archives.
Was it food poisoning?
I don't know. I feel like he's gotten a little more judicious in when he chooses to devour stuff.
Also, you can't procure the right stuff all the time,
Well,
right?
he's still taking risks. He's still living on the edge. He's eating MRE pork from the 70s. Like, he's not a normal human. But I've noticed him steering clear of things that are particularly toxic and perhaps fatal in newer episodes.
At one of our mutually favorite watering holes, there's like a prop MRE behind the bar that looks cool, but clearly pretty old. Through the popularity of Steve 1989, I expect that thing to just disappear one day. I'm like, yo, what happened to that MRE? Did someone eat it? It's like, yeah, your homie had a bunch of Jägermeister and ate that thing.
He said in a recent video in one of the comments that he's procured a incredibly well-preserved collection from someone who passed away that had these all refrigerated for decades at the proper temperature. So I think we're about to enter like the
That's
golden
wild.
age of Steve 1989 from, early 90s MREs where everything is completely intact and it hasn't been like sitting in someone's basement with, silverfish running around it for the last couple decades.
I don't think you know this about me, but I am a food hoarder. Like, I kind of entertain the idea of getting an auxiliary freezer. And in New York City, that's kind of a bold move because our apartments are pretty small.
What about a wine fridge?
I'm not Detrick level sophisticated. But
What are you hoarding? Do you have like venison steaks that you bow hunted or something?
not far from it, before I changed my diet, I would like be really into creating like master broths, like soup broths. So I would like boil bones for hours and have like containers marked with dates on them that went back for like years, because every time I'd make like a new dish for people or whoever came through, I would use that master broth, create more of it, and then save more of it. So it kind of lasted forever. I had containers of that, frozen dumplings from Chinatown. What's up? A bunch of like frozen things that I want to eat later. I love hoarding food, but there was a blackout. Remember that blackout where the Manhattan went dark? Mm-hmm. I lost everything. Never went back. Stopped hoarding.
It's interesting because what Steve 1989 does in eating very old food seems nonsensical, but growing up, I had one of my, I guess it would be a great aunt, and she was very old, and she used a lot of things that were in her cupboards in making cakes, pies, what have you, cookies,
Shout out to your aunt.
cookie soups. But you'd find out later that she used rhubarb from 30 years prior. And kind of everything was fine.
It's fine, right.
It really didn't matter. But she was absolutely delving into cabinets. We found one particular that the guy who had picked that batch of fruit had died 30 years before. So I don't even know when that
Was it like jellied or jammed or something?
jellies, jams, just preserves, a bunch of frozen strawberries. But the dude who had picked them had been dead for 20 years.
So the thing that I always think about when I see movies of like, bunkers and like apocalyptic dudes who set up like cabinet or pantries full of food that last them years. I'm like, if you go through the supermarket and look through those cans, they have expiration dates of like 3 years, 2 years. Like if you get a delicious can of white beans and tomato sauce at Trader Joe's, the date is like not what you think it is. It's like 2022. And I'm like, that's not that long. Am I going to have to fight zombies like in 2 years?
Yeah, that's true. It's like, all right, well, I'd love to stay in this bunker, but we've got to go deal with this radioactive fallout because we've just hit the expiration dates on like all of these delicacies.
Yeah, man. But like, shout out to the blackout.
These chickpeas are old, and we've got to go up and fight a zombie.
Have you ever eaten like old canned food? You can tell right away. It tastes like metal. It tastes like this tinny kind of like sour sharpness. You know right away. Like every time someone's like, "Is this good or bad?" I'm like, as soon as you put it in your mouth, you'll know.
There's some cans out there if you want to look into them that need to be tossed that are about 2 years expired. You want to do a little taste test.
What's the ceiling for that, Tatum? Like, what's the ceiling of me eating a can of beans on your floor that have been in your cupboard for 5 years?
Martell Webster. Is there any news in Chinese food? Because you just gave a shout out to Chinatown. You're like, shout out Chinatown. It's like, to who? Just the region?
I love Chinatown. It's the only surviving zone in Manhattan. But
Is that true?
well, it's been written about. Like the leases are held by like all these minority holders, and no one sells their building because there's too many people involved, and they've died. They're not citizens, and like they just remain in the possession of these conglomerates of just like 15 families.
Shout out to Mr. Fong.
Shout out to Mr. Fong and the bar Mr. Fong's. But so what's happening in the East Village is kind of like what we predicted on Cookies, right? Like there was all these noodle shops maybe in the fall that opened up. Like rice noodles were a thing, kind of. And I mentioned that on Yelp there had been kind of maybe one troll. It's probably just like, it's always this one person who was just like, can we get some diversity up in here? Like, what about Indian food? What about halal food? What about Middle Eastern? And, like all these delicious things that I would love to eat. But I'm like, if people wanted all those options, we're going to get them because people will stop going to the noodle shops and they'll just close.
That's a very capitalist way of approaching this.
It's pretty much it. And now they're kind of closing one by one. Even good ones are closing.
We had talked about this a few months ago when I walked down from 14th Street one day. And, living in Brooklyn, you're not around during the day as much in the city. And I was definitely stunned by the proliferation of noodle spots.
So many.
And it didn't make sense that they could actually all survive. And even if you have a heavy amount of tourists who are coming there specifically for that reason, it just didn't look as if it was sustainable because there were so many. It was like ramen, 3 per block going all the way down First, A, B, wherever. And it's a little bit different because it's not Chinatown, which is still heavily populated by Chinese people.
But now it's NYU, which has a lot of Chinese expats.
Is that part of it?
100. Yeah, it's like the new Chinese elite sending their kids to New York, affording that NYU tuition. But Michael Lewis had like a great image or a great idea in the pod world this week. It was just like if he described capitalism, right? And I was like, let's say there's a pipeline from oil from one place to another, and then a leak springs. A normal person or someone who maybe isn't as capitalist would be like, hey, whoever's on A or B, there's a leak. You should fix it because this oil belongs to you. A true capitalist would create a city around that leak and siphon the oil and create like a whole infrastructure around that leakage. And that's how he described like people who take advantage of stock market loopholes, which I think is super interesting in his book, Flash Boys, whatever. And that's very much what Chinese people, I feel like, do. It's just like, oh, there's a hit noodle shop. We're going to open up 5 more hit noodle shops right next door. And like one by one, like we'll decide which ones are good. Some are there forever. Some like never have anyone in it. Some are lauded and then
Just
just
a
closed.
bootlegging mentality.
I love it, right? Because like, yeah, I mean, the interns love bootlegs at Cookies, you know, like we're part of that kind of culture, right?
The interns, yeah, they're bootlegging experts.
But so my question is to you is like, have we hit peak noodle soup ramen kind of things because of scarcity, availability, or have we hit the peak because of the flavor? Have we had the ultimate bowl of ramen already?
Yeah, I think it's one of those issues where when you first have it, the unctuous mix of umami and noodles and pork belly, and it's great. Okay, this is the miso one, whatever.
We've been to Oputo together.
Yeah,
That place is amazing.
awesome. And then it's like, ooh, Ivan Ramen has opened up. Okay, that place
Shout
is
out.
great. And there's all these variations. And after a while, you're like, well, how much better is this one than one I've had before?
It's a burger phenomenon.
After a while, we're all just eating good bowls of ramen.
Yes.
And if that's no longer unique or a treat, then like, what are we even doing here?
Yeah.
Because there's no experience, there's no scarcity. And beyond that, it's kind of out of favor with the way that our dietary trends have moved since like that moment when ramen arrived as like the foodie grail. Like we've moved away from noodles, we've moved away from pork, we've moved away from the heaviness of that aesthetic. And that was really tied to like ramen, Brooklyn, pork, old-timey shit.
Blogs.
Blogs,
yeah.
cocktails,
Food Network at
like-
the time.
like whiskey, just all these ideas,
Artisanal stuff. Right.
pickles, like all
Yeah.
these things that were so emblematic of foodie culture
Yeah.
in like the mid 2000s. And now it's a different time. Now it's about things that are lighter. It's about subway tiles and fresh vegetables and smoothies and everything being about like LA.
And vegan options. And I was lucky enough to go to Japan a few months ago, and I may be talking out of place, but it felt at a saturation point there too. But it felt just like a part of their ingrained culture, right? It's just like, oh, what would you like? This, or ramen? And it's like, oh, here is where we go get it, and it's good. But we're not just like, oh, but is it the best? They're like, oh, you want the best? It's good. It's good enough, you know? It's like the way we see. Again, I may be speaking out of place, but it's the way we see.
Don't
like,
you dare. That's not what Cookies is about.
like no one talks about lunch food in this like pantheon, right? Like when it's time to go get lunch, it's just like lunch is on me. Where do you want to go? And we just do it. And there's a utilitarian aspect to that. But dinner, we create kind of like a weird, different class structure where it's just like, but where's the best pork bun? Rank them 1 to 5, you know, like, and that's two different kinds of ways of eating. And I think ramen has maybe receded into just like, are you hungry for ramen? Instead of like, I know there's a good ramen spot.
For sure. And I think ramen also, to me at least, and this is probably where it departs from the way it's I guess positioned in the Japanese culture, is that I view it as a winter food. It's a beautiful day in New York City today. The birds are chirping, the sun is out.
Yeah.
I don't want a hot, spicy bowl of bone marrow and noodles.
Yeah. This is where I got to stand up for my Chinese homies, especially Taiwan, because you know, this Japanese ramen that is super delicious, where like it tastes like 5 animals have been boiled into your bowl, you know?
I mean, that sounds great.
Yeah, but like it's derived from like stuff that's pretty light. I hate this angle, but like peasant food and cheap. It was supposed to be cheap. It's like a starch in broth. Like how cheap can you get? $2. You can just walk off with it. I'll wash it in this river, whatever. Boat noodles are the best things on earth. And like there's so much variation in China and Taiwan and Southeast Asia with this kind of thing. But the Japanese are accelerationists, like they're the warriors, right? They're just like, oh, you're making chicken broth? I think we're gonna make pork, chicken, beef broth with as much stuff as we can. And of course, I want to line up and try it. But at a certain point, it lacks some sort of like kind of excitement. You know, like we have reached peak Luol Deng. Like there's no higher for Tatum than Luol Deng. It's just down from there. So like the cheaper versions, to me, my point is the cheaper versions offer a bit more spice.
Or just lightness, diversity, more seasonality than the ones that are
Yeah.
intentionally heavy, crazy savory, full of all these meat products.
Yeah, yeah.
You know what else is the other news in New York that I found disturbing?
Oh,
It's an awkward segue, but
Wow.
I'm just going to do it.
wow.
You heard about this guy who's riding around on the back of trains, pulling the emergency brake and then jumping off and running into the tunnels, and apparently has been doing this to many trains all around New York City and completely fucking up the MTA subway system. There was one day when he allegedly did it 4 times, 5 times. Question, does this guy exist?
Yes, and like that children's character Thanos in the Avengers, I can't be that mad at him because
Really?
he has a larger point. Okay, it's miserable for everybody who's traveling. I get that. It's awful. It's the worst to be like being like, I'll see you at dinner in 45 minutes. I mean 2 hours. Like that's just brutal, and that's an assault on our schedule, right? But in a larger picture, it's just like, MTA, get your shit straight, man. You guys have been so bad at this for so long. One guy who's a prankster can derail this whole thing. Fix it.
Well, that's the fragility, right? And you realize that, well, especially with politics and things now, you're like, wait, the checks and balances here were just someone not doing that? Like, oh, the president can do this, and he's just not going to follow laws. You're like, oh, that was only in place because people said they were going to follow laws. There's no adults in the room. And honestly, it's a kind of terrifying thought, even when you think of it from the way of like gun control. We're like, we've got to take guns away from people because it just takes one idiot to go do something. And even in the way of like, when we hear about someone spraying a swastika on a church or something, or on a temple, you know, you're like, that should not be national news.
That's one guy.
That's one idiot doing some dumb shit. And it's in this way, you're like, this is one idiot doing some dumb shit that's actually taking down a
right.
transit system that serves like 20 million people on a weekday or something along those lines. And we can't stop him. We have this villain is ravaging our lives, and we have no solution. You just got to catch this guy who's like pushing buttons and then running through subway tracks. Like, it's not even
A button that's right there for all of us to push.
It's so
It could
nuts.
be anybody. I mean, it could be a whole swarm of people, but if it was just one, it would be hilarious.
And it's like, look, this system is reliant on no one doing that. It's like, that's it. The entire safeguard is,
Yeah.
I don't think anyone would want to do that. That would be crazy.
Like telling people who visit New York like why our train is delayed for like 40 minutes. It's like, oh, 4 trains ahead, someone doesn't feel well. I'm like, what happened? Did they throw up? Like that's all it takes, right? This whole thing just comes to a grinding halt. And like it's tricky. Like I don't envy the people who have to fix the MTA, but they should, because I don't know what to do about weirdos and specifically people with schizophrenia. Like they just get on the subway because they paid for it. You can't ask them if they paid for it. I assume they paid for it, and like they see stuff we don't, and they're not rushing off in the same way we are. and they're like, "Are you guys seeing this or not?" It's like, we got to stop the train. Something's happening. We're not equipped to deal with this on like a humane level, right?
Of course not. And that's why I think when people talk about, oh, New Yorkers are rude or they don't care about their fellow humans, like, that's not really true. A lot of times, all you can do is sit there and, like, look at your phone.
Yeah, totally.
I was coming back from the city through Queens or something, I forget exactly, and some guy is next to me and just starts yelling threats at everyone. And I hear him walking on, and you're avoiding eye contact. And he comes and like stands like exactly next to me, and starts berating people around the train. He was like a large dude, and you're like, wow, where is this going to escalate to? I'm going to mind my own business. I'm going to sit here. But if something happens, I'm the closest available like adult. And he sat there and got into a war of words with a teenager who was just there like, responding in a teenager way, but not antagonizing him, but just being like, nah, dude, leave me alone, whatever, blah, blah, blah. And you're like, is he going to attack this teenager? He said something about like stabbing him. And I'm like, does he have a knife? I'm like, when does your day go completely derailed because some maniac decided to do something along those lines? And fortunately it didn't. And I just sat there looking at my phone. I got off and I came back home and watched some Steve 1989 videos. But the real
Just
thing
chilling out.
your day could totally go awry for no reason.
And like, if you're lucky enough to travel, and I think we've both been lucky enough to travel, you see other cities where it feels different. Like people may be nicer, to strangers, or it has a lot to do with like tourism and economy and all this stuff. But like in general, like New York is legitimately kind of like a hard-edged place. But as soon as you live here for a while, you're like, oh, right. There's a concentration of mental illness among us that like I am personally am not equipped to deal with. And it's like, oh, why didn't you interact with that person who needed your help? I'm like, he's schizophrenic. Like, I don't know how to do this. If I give him $5, I see him every day. If I give him $5, like that opens up a gateway to this thing. Like, how do you help? Like it's really tricky. And I don't envy people who have to deal with like subway pranksters or subway non-pranksters.
Yeah, you're more or less confronted by insanity, or
which means like a way of thinking
fragmented-
that isn't yours.
a fragmented mental health system that has fallen apart. And
this is a great place for a mental ill person to be because they have help. And people will give them money. And, like we always try to buy them food. If they're standing in front of a restaurant, like, can you buy me a meal too? I'm like, yes. The answer is always yes,
along the L line, there's been a couple dudes who are kind of similar. And there's maybe two or three. They're just like younger white guys who are really antagonistic and like grumble about not getting money. I don't know if you've seen them. There's two that were very similar in that way. And they'd be like, come on, can someone help me? Really?
That's tough. Man.
Really? No one is going to help me here? And they walk around like, are you kidding me? No one can give me $1? Seriously? And you're like, dude, you have to shut the fuck up and get out of my face.
Yeah.
Because like, give me a sob story.
Right.
Like, do not whine.
Yeah.
Like, come on, do not whine. Get on the subway, do a magic trick, lie to me. Say you're trying to work and everything is a debacle and blah, blah, blah. But do not sit there and be like, seriously? Only yuppies can't even give me $1. And they're just like scruffy white heroin addicts.
Yeah.
You're like, dude, get a trade.
I mean, this is when the worst part of me comes out, when I try to like psychologically or just like take on somebody I've only known for 3 seconds. And I'm just like, I don't want to have to choose who I give the rest of my money to, but you have to in New York because you only have like how much money is in your wallet. And I think it's important to give money to people who ask for it. But like, yeah, you always have to make that call on the fly. And it could, and when I say the worst part of me, I'm like, oh, does he remind me of my friend that always asks me for money? Do I know someone like that? Did I grow up in the 90s around gutter punks? Like, what is happening in that 2 seconds it takes me to think of giving him my money or not? Or them my money or not?
Beyond that, I gotta say, the the rise of credit as a preferred way of spending money has got to really be wrecking havoc with the panhandling operation.
Well, that's going to be gone too. Sweet Green recognized that it was classist, and now they're taking cash. It's just going to happen. Like, it is mean. I think everyone should accept cash.
Yeah, I know there's that burrito spot around the corner. They don't either. And I'm like, what?
It's not their fault.
But what is your explanation for not taking cash?
Well, it's streamlined. They're not thinking about, like, the people who maybe don't have cards. They're just thinking, like, oh, this is so streamlined. We're in the future. It's not malicious. It's just, I don't think so, unless they are. But, like, yeah, sometimes people don't have enough money to open up a bank account.
No, I think everyone should have to take cash.
Yeah, for sure. I agree. But I don't know.
And even if it's not money, even if whatever your business is saying, and I'm talking about the individual, not the actual business, whatever reason you want to use cash, it's legal tender. Like, establishments should have to take it.
Yeah.
They should probably have to take rolls of pennies if you really take it to that. It's money.
Yeah.
It's money. Take money.
And that's why I think this prankster on the MTA is kind of a mad genius, because here we are talking about shit. He's just pulling brakes. And then we're just like, oh, it's really unjust how we treat people in the MTA system. He's just pulling brakes and running down dark.
Well,
is it you? Is it where's Jordan?
Yeah, seriously, is it Jordan?
Jordan? I'm
late today because I made my own train late.
I had to dart down a dark tunnel.
Speaking of dark tunnels, the Milwaukee Bucks are now looking into one where the future was bright, rosy, up 2-0 against the Toronto Raptors in the Eastern Conference Finals. They have now dropped 3 consecutive games, right?
Yeah, one at home. Yeah, they were up 2-0.
3 in a row. And most of these are heartbreakers. These are really competitive games. And the Bucks are now confronted with a situation in which they have to beat a team twice in a row that has just beaten them thrice in a row. How you feeling about this series?
Annoyed, because it's like, do I want to have my fun now or later? I thought we were going to have our fun later. I thought the Milwaukee Bucks looked really great. And
I had totally checked out on this series, I'll be honest. After the 2 wins,
no fun.
I was
They're
like,
no fun. Right.
I was like, it's cool, it's over. The Bucks are gonna walk. Let's get up for the finals and let's pay attention to that. Yeah. Toronto wins 1. You're like, no biggie.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Gentleman sweep.
Don't even need to really watch yet. And then you're like, oh, wait a minute, it's a close game. Let me watch it. And you're like, oh shit, Toronto's gonna win this series?
Yeah. Kawhi goes, his calf injury is not as bad as we thought. He goes nuclear, like the Terminator he is. Not the good Terminator like Ben Simmons, but like an annoying, dull Terminator. Yeah, I wanted to talk about the matchup between like number 1 and the Warriors, but now we got to deal with Toronto. And it's fun. Like, I'm happy to be wrong about this, because like having fun is just having fun. And I don't think either of these teams look like they can beat the Warriors.
I disagree.
I know. We'll get to that later. But like, them being checked by the Bucks being checked by the Raptors was a little bit disappointing to me. But then that disappears right quick, and it's just like, oh, this is fun, and this is the right way to be wrong. Being like, I think this is not going to be entertaining. I'm like, oh, this is very entertaining.
Seriously, we're complaining about a 3-2
I'm happy to be
series
wrong here.
Between the 2 teams with the best 2 records in the NBA.
Let's go 7.
Yeah, it was just more, I think, as a Sixer fan, them falling to the Raptors.
God,
but them falling to the Raptors and the Raptors advancing and not really wanting to watch the team that had just ousted your guys.
Yeah.
Weirdly, last night, I'm rooting for the Raptors. I don't know how it happened. I've never rooted for the Raptors to win a game in my life. And there I was, last night, wanting Kawhi to give them the business.
I've never felt this way about Giannis before. He was really frustrating to watch last night, where I was on your side.
Go off, King.
Giannis was like doing that Embiid thing where he was pump faking at the line and just like trying to Euro step his way into like triple coverage and like begging for fouls over and over. And I'm like, ether him, Kawhi. Just do it. End this guy.
No, when he hit that three and that
Bombs, man.
He hit a three. No, I'm sorry. Giannis hit a three.
Oh, okay, that
And it was
weird
a,
one.
It was
Yeah,
a
yeah.
big pivotal moment, and everyone's celebrating. I was like, these boys are cooked.
Yeah.
Giannis can't make threes. They can't get to the line. Them surviving on a Giannis three, I'm like, they're doomed.
Well, before we pile on Giannis too much,
I'm not piling on him. I'm saying
yeah.
it was an unethical shot, and it came back to burn them.
Middleton and Bledsoe having fluky games. Credit to Toronto's defense. Okay, these are two very good defensive teams. So
Two of the top 5 in the league.
definitely. So what we're watching will be frustrating because they're so good defensively. They rotate well. They have size. They have talent. They have good coaches. Like these are
There's a lot of wingspans in the mix. Like you throw a
So
pass,
much.
you have to get it over a thicket
yeah,
of long arms.
for sure. Kawhi and Giannis, all NBA defensive players, I believe. Well, I think Kawhi got it, but like, we always defer to like, what's wrong with Bledsoe? What's wrong with Siakam? What's wrong with Lowry? What's wrong with Middleton? And I'm like, oh, top-rated defenses. That's what's happening. This is what top-rated defenses do. They make good offenses look weird, right?
Yeah, I am disappointed in Bledsoe, not because I care about his performance, but that he is a really good player, and it's 2 years in a row where he's had rough playoffs, or at least in climactic moments he's performed pretty poorly. And I think he was something like 1 of 16 or something from three. There was a really gnarly stat about his shooting going into last night. And Bledsoe's a great player. He's been exceptionally good all year. After being torched by Rozier last season and being kind of made a fool of, and to have him come back and be shitty, it reminds me a little of Lowry in that way.
But that's exactly to my point. It's like we look at Lowry's shittiness and Bledsoe's shittiness, but they also provide so much defense. Well, Bledsoe does. He's like a very good defender.
Lowry's a really good defender too.
And they affect each other. And they kind of mess each other up at times. And optically, it's really hard to talk about because it's just like, what Bledsoe sucks now. I'm like, keep watching him. He's why this game is close.
Well, it's sort of what we were saying about the Toronto Sixers series a couple weeks ago. When Embiid playing poorly, you don't come away from that series and say, Embiid is to blame. That's just a variable. Sometimes guys are bad. Sometimes the defense makes you bad. Sometimes you're hurt. Sometimes you're sick. Those are just things that happen.
And
you
Embiid on the court is still good, even when he's not scoring.
But you can be like, well, we lost because Bledsoe or Lowry played poorly. That can be true, but you also shouldn't blame them.
And it's a coin
they're
flip because-
trying hard
Right.
and they're doing the best that they can. You can attribute a loss to their poor performance, but like blaming them to me is just weird. Like you're mad at that guy, like he's doing the best that he can. He's just missing shots.
It's like when Kawhi took over the Spurs, people framed Duncan's kind of like subdued total performance statistically because he got old, which is true. But if he was younger and that same thing happened and the same outcome happened that they won championships, they're like, what was wrong with Duncan? And I'm like, oh, when he's not blocking, rebounding, and scoring, he's like an outlet for a pass. When you put the ball in his hands, he doesn't turn it over. Like Bledsoe, even though he's shooting really poorly, handles the ball, sets up the offense. It's a coin flip game because of him. If he scores more, they just win.
But again, with Lowry and Bledsoe, same deal. Sometimes you shoot bad.
Of course.
Sometimes the defense is making you take shots that you'd prefer not to, or you're rushing it, or whatever the case is. It's like, I just don't get that wrapped up in a couple playoff games.
Right,
It's just
exactly.
doesn't define who a player is or what they can do because, even playing ball the last couple of weeks, I probably went two of like,
YMCA legend.
but I'm saying I
Touching
probably went
net.
I've probably gone 2 of 20 in my last in-game threes.
Yeah.
Sometimes you miss.
Yeah.
Like it just happens. It's math.
Yeah, and people coming for receipts in the playoffs is going to happen, and like try to avoid that kind of noise in your life because it's just like, what's up with Giannis now? I'm like, oh, he's still MVP. He's awesome. He had 2 bad games, 3 bad games. Like, he's unbelievable. It's like, well, that's when it counted. And Kawhi has like the championship pedigree. So until Giannis gets it, and I'm like, then how do we frame players who are first time champions? Like, they don't have the pedigree until they get it. Like, it just doesn't make
Oh,
sense.
100%. That's how everyone thinks. LeBron wasn't a champion until he was a champion, despite the fact that LeBron had been the best player in basketball for like 6 years already.
So if Giannis gets the championship this year, the framing will be like, oh, he always had it in him.
I mean, we talked about this with Dirk.
Yeah.
Dirk as a champion became a mythical, beloved character forever. Him without a championship was like the soft Euro.
Yeah.
Anyway, without rehashing that, because you're going to come in and be wrong about something, and then we'll get into it. But
Always.
what I wanted to say before about the Raps versus Milwaukee is I think either of these teams are totally capable of beating a Golden State team without KD.
Can you give percentages on that? What do you mean by totally capable? Is it like a 40% chance, a 50% chance, a 60% chance?
I think it's like 50% in both. I think it's a coin toss in both situations. And that's not to say that the Warriors aren't good, but Warriors with old Livingston, old Iguodala, KD not playing, there's no great bench. There's no fourth guy who they can count on to play well. Like Looney's like a guy. He's all right. He can play some defense, but I don't look at that team and be like, yeah, McKinnon's going to come in and be a game changer. That just is not a scary team at all outside of the big three. The other guys are old. Iguodala's kind of banged up. I'm looking at Toronto and Milwaukee as teams who had better records during the regular season, have played them tough over the last few times they've met, and have a chance to be in the finals against them without Kevin Durant, without arguably the best player on that team. I'm like, this is a golden fucking opportunity for the Raptors or the Bucks, two teams, the Raptors and the Bucks, to win a title, like out of the blue.
You're having a Bledsoe-ish pod because you're just missing. You're totally wrong about this. I mean, you'll have those pods. It's fine.
You're living 3 years ago in the past. In your mind, Dave West is coming through that door.
I think the Bucks or the Raptors for sure have a chance, but my odds are much different. They're more like,
What do you mean? It's
70,
they win or they lose. It's 50-50.
right, exactly. There's always a chance. There's always a chance, but like all you did was name players, and I think even though they don't have Durant, they're a better team with Durant. The Warriors always, and they're a different team without him, and not as good. Still better than anyone in the East. Draymond Green being the best player in the playoffs, and those two Splash Brothers are enough to beat anybody in the field.
Totally possible. And again, I'm saying coin toss.
Yeah, I don't believe it is a coin toss. I weight it heavily to, but 70-30 is confusing, right? Because 30 is a huge chance.
But that's kind of where I'm at. I'm not saying, I don't want to argue about 30 versus 50, but we're saying.
But that's a big difference.
But it's a big difference, but it's also not a big difference. And that we're talking about 3 out of 10 versus 5 out of 10. It's a big difference for the team trying to win, but it's not a big difference in terms of us saying, no, the Warriors are far better and they're going to win 9 out of 10 times. Like, they are much better. You're like, they're better by a bit.
See,
and I'm saying, I don't even know if they're better than either of these teams without KD. Like, I think they'll probably lose to
for
either
sure.
of these two.
Oh no, I don't think so. But like, this is a thing that like is confusing, and we've talked about it before. But quickly, like, this is how Nate Silver got famous, and people are like, "But these are all close elections," and he's like, "But in every close election, I know who will win that close election." It's like there's a way to figure that out. And he's like, "You're right. It's very close. It was like 51-49, but I picked 51 every time," and that's confusing, right?
Well, of course, because elections going 51-49 or 52-48 are actually not a coin toss. That's
And I don't think the finals is a coin toss either. I'm going to hedge away from a coin toss.
I'm only saying this because I just look at the rest of that roster and I say, not impressive at all. And as great as their stars are.
But you're just naming players.
What do you mean? I'm saying they have played each other tight for 2 years, straight.
It could. Yes, I'm not saying that's out of the realm of possibility, but it feels like a take you want to have, right? Like the Warriors
Not really,
are still,
because I would love to have the take where I said the Warriors, even without Kevin Durant, are so much better than these other teams that KD's arrival there is egregious. We're vacating titles, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, that's kind of what people are saying now. And they're looking at this Golden State team after demolishing Portland and being like, wow, they don't need KD at all. Maybe they're better without him. I'm just using a broad brush for opinions here. And I'm like, I think Milwaukee and Toronto are very good teams that are maybe not as good as the LeBron, Kevin Love, Kyrie Cavs group, but neither is this Golden State team the same team that LeBron had to pin Iguodala in Game 7 to beat. This group is not the same.
I think they might even be better. But because Steph is better, Clay is better, and Draymond is nuclear right now. But last pod, I was very confident that the Bucks had a good chance against these Warriors. After seeing a very simple adjustment, putting your best player on the other best player has neutralized the Bucks, which is odd to see a simple thing, wonderfully simple. I was really into it. Work changed my opinion about the Bucks. So I'm claiming our brains are weird, and especially when there's not enough happening, we go to far off places. And I'm claiming this is a version of reverse regional bias, where it's no one's giving them a chance. They both have a chance. They don't. Right? Let's go for the simplest outcome, which is the best team wins.
The other thing is that, but sure, but that's kind of where I'm at. I'm like, I don't know if Golden State without Durant is a better team than either of these ones in the East. They didn't have a better record than either of them. They certainly
But a lot has happened since. Just putting Draymond on Giannis will have a similar effect.
All right, so this is what I was going to say to that exact point. Is I'm speculating. I think within a minute and a half of that series.
Oh, we'll know.
We'll know. It's that quick.
We'll know. Yeah.
And I'll be the first to be like, oh, Drake can guard him.
Yeah.
It's cool. Got it. Yeah. Golden State's going to rock them. Yeah. Trust me, I am fully aware of that. I'm here I think Milwaukee can beat them.
It's
and
funny.
If Drake can keep them from getting to the basket, I will retract it before we're 2 minutes into the first quarter. Oh, yeah, he can't get to the basket against Trey. They're completely fucked.
It reminds me of and this is highfalutin. One time I saw Brian Eno give a talk, and it was kind of one of the best talks I've ever seen. There was a standing ovation. He was super funny, but he was talking about his role as a producer, and he gets a lot of demos, dozens a day or maybe 40 a week from people who want to him to hear their music, or businesses or labels that are just you want to work with this band. And he says he listens to every one, but only 5 seconds to most, because he knows in 5 seconds whether he likes it or not. And he went on to explain that more, but I thought it was such an emotion that we all have. The minute we start a show, we're oh, see you in 5 hours because I'm going to binge this whole damn thing. Versus this isn't for me. We know kind of right away. And we do all this posturing and thinking, and I'm trying to make sense of all these teams when they haven't seen each other at this point in the season. And you're right. The minute we see the finals, we're just oh, we know which way this will go, and we can predict 3 or 4 adjustments in the future.
Exactly. So, I had tweeted something along the lines of what I just said, that, one of the appeals of this Golden State team without Durant is not only stylistically they have to play a different way that accentuates the gifts that Steph Curry has and that Draymond have and Klay Thompson, et cetera, is that we can at least operate with the conceit that they are beatable. And whether that's via Houston or other teams in the Western Conference, or arguably the top 4 teams in the East. Because if you say this Golden State team with Iguodala banged up and old, and without KD,
You say old, but he was having a great season, postseason before he got banged
he
up.
is, but he's old.
Yeah, for sure.
And you can say, well, I kind of like how the Bucks, the Raptors, the Sixers, the Celtics, I like how these teams match up against them. Whether or not they are beatable by those teams, it's a fully understandable way of approaching the Golden State Warriors without KD. To me, with KD, we're not even allowed to imagine that.
Respect to future legend, Knicks legend, Kevin Durant. But
Exactly.
right, I mean, it's a more boring series with KD. Not only because they'll win, just optically it's boring, but
I'm saying it's both. It's
Yeah.
stylistic and it's just
the outcome.
your
is
dream is
determined.
already crushed.
Yeah.
When KD's there, you're like,
Yeah.
you can't beat this team with KD. Get out of here.
And that's the interesting thing with size, right? Because KD's tall and he looks a certain way when he plays. When these little guys like Steph Curry are dropping bombs on you, you have Charles Barkley being like, this is unsustainable. 4 championships later, he's like, this will be more unsustainable moving forward.
Are you saying this is size bias?
Of course it is. The Splash Brothers, that's their whole narrative is size bias. Draymond at the 5 is also a size bias. And you will look at them and they'll beat maybe whoever comes out of the East in like 6 games or even 7 games. It'll be like, how did they overcome that? I'm like, oh, they're just better. They just look smaller.
Yeah, I mean, I actually do think there's a good chance they will lose to those teams. But whatever, as
I mean,
we're
it's
saying,
fun. Let's watch it.
As we're both getting at, like,
Yeah.
you know right away.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, Curry will do his thing and he'll get hot and cold, but we're looking at the Kawhi Dre or Giannis Dre matchup.
So, other news, outside of the looming finals between one of these two teams and the Warriors, is that the All NBA teams were announced, and that's arguably, I guess, the top 15 players in the league, but it's broken down by position. So you get guys like Kemba Walker or Rudy Gobert in that mix, who no one would really say are top 15 players, or at least are not conventionally known as such. One of the more controversial ones and closest was the center position. And you had Nikola Jokic defeat Joel Embiid. And
First team, second team.
exactly. And the voting was like relatively close. I think it was tighter than maybe some of the other matchups, but it was also an interesting philosophical standpoint too, because Embiid fits your category as a monster in the paint who blocks shots, as a defensive force who scores in the post, and then Jokic is a really unique, weird player. To me, the most boring take here is that Jokic played 16 more games, and they're both really good, and Jokic's team won a couple more games.
You know the writers care about that,
Like,
though.
that to me is just like the most boring reason that it makes sense for Jokic to win it. They're both great. One played, 20% more games.
I agree, and although you can't discount the factor of popularity, because a lot of the people who vote for these awards are writers, and they spend time with these guys, and like Embiid has a different personality than Jokic, right? And I think they're both amazing players, but the flaw of this whole thing is like Ben Simmons was in the guard category and Jokic was in a center category. Like, if we're eliminating centers in the All-Star game, shouldn't we be eliminating them in the All-NBA team? Like,
It doesn't make sense.
it doesn't. And Jokic to me is a point guard, right? And I would put him against Kemba Walker a little bit.
Which is hilarious. I love that.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense
Jokic,
like when you say
guard,
it.
Simmons, guard, Kemba, guard.
Yeah.
I want some guards to go the other direction.
Yeah. I mean, Draymond should be a center, right? But he's a
Or
forward.
guard.
Absolutely, Draymond is a guard.
So let's just get rid of positions.
I agree. Just like
5 best players.
Yeah.
They're on your team 1. 5, second 5, third 5. Like, why are we still being like, oh, we've got to reward these guys by position? They're all good. We don't forget about centers or guards.
because the next man up for every position would be like, oh, I do more than just a guard. Like, whatever you think about Klay Thompson, like, he's probably just like, yo, a lot of these guys aren't guards. Like, and I'm left out of it. And there's money involved. And I don't know. the one disappointment I had was like it brought up all these debates that kind of felt old fashioned, which is like you said, games played and like statistics, and then people being like, well, their team made the playoffs, so like how can they be worse? And I'm just like, well, a lot of factors go into it. Like Russell Westbrook's stats are kind of false because Steven Adams lets him get rebounds because he knows his teammates love that fucking
But it also
rebound.
takes all the dynamics that are dull about the MVP race and makes it even more dull because it's just all NBA. Like, who even cares other than the guys because it affects some of their salaries. But in terms of the rest of us, we're here talking about it. I don't care who's on the NBA team, and I won't ever remember who was on the third all-NBA team.
But remember that me and you are post caring about awards and championships.
I mean, I don't even care who wins MVP.
I don't care who wins a championship. Like
Yeah.
these teams are good. Like they're all winners or losers. I don't care. You know?
It's not just that everyone's a loser but one. They're all losers.
Yeah. Congratulations, Durant. You're a loser.
Every team, even the champion, loser.
Shot went in, buddy. But yeah, so that list kind of like there's no umph to it anymore, aside from contract ramifications that we'll talk in depth later on in this pod, because it really affects the way the architecture of some of these teams are going to be constructed in the future. But
I think we can get to a lot of that stuff about Golden State and Kemba next week.
yeah, for sure.
But the one thing I did want to talk about in the immediate sense was some of the players objected publicly to the fact that these positions are decided by writers and the voting of a selected group of writers. Duh, these dorks. And Larry Nance was one who put up a post.
Senior.
Junior, who put up a post just saying something about very, not even, it wasn't hateful, it wasn't anything. It was just more like, hey, we're the ones who play against these guys. Shouldn't we be the ones deciding?
What's up with the Lakers family tree being so salty and not millennial enough?
That mystique.
They're a bunch of baby boomers, man.
Just Gen Xers.
Yeah.
But do you think Nance has a point? Should the players be the ones determining who's named to all NBA teams?
No, because that's not how, I hate this word, the simulation works, right? The players are amazing. There would be no game without them, but we can't ask for everybody to be the totality of, thinking about a thing and, being involved in it. It's hard to be critical of it. And, me and you are really involved in this pod, and we try to be as critical as possible. Perfect every time. Never had a bad pod. Each one is more perfect than the last.
And that's a tough mantle to keep up with, but we do it.
Yeah, and I think that to be able to step away from it and frame it and put it into compartments, you can't be in it. It's just it's too much to ask for Larry Nance not to be like, I'm the perfect player. I'm not the perfect player.
I don't know. I think I understand 100% where he, and we'll talk about Josh Hart in a second, but where these players are coming from. I get it.
Oh, no, it's not misunderstanding.
Right. No, their perspective is totally sensible. At the same time, we're talking about guys who have allegiances to each other, guys who are on teams, who have bonds that go back to AAU, college, maybe petty gripes and grievances. And not to say that writers don't have those exact same things. Of course they do. But players' jobs are to play basketball. Writers' jobs are to be the critics of the sport. So to say musicians should rank the favorite albums of their own, it's totally cool if we hear that opinion, but maybe the problem here is not that writers are deciding it. Maybe it's that contracts are affected.
And
I get it. Why do the writers messing with our money? That's valid. Why do the writers get to say? Not valid.
Yeah, and I think of politics first. It's if you're a corporation, no one on your board should be able to be a politician who writes the rules for your corporation to operate in. It's just simple checks and balances. And I think players being responsible for this voting when there's money ramifications, it leaves the door open for a lot of corruption. Not to say that there isn't mild corruption, whatever you think that is. Like, here's 20 grand. Can you vote for me? You know, like whatever that may be. But you need a little bit of separation from church and state to have a viewable product, which is the list.
Also, the players get to vote on All-Stars,
Yeah.
and it's a total farce.
Yeah.
Not only are they generally just wrong across the board, they don't take it seriously. And for all the writers that have terrible shit opinions, their names are associated with the people that they vote for. I'm not sure about with the all NBA teams, but definitely in terms of Rookie of the Year and MVP and things like that, like you can see who people vote for. And with the players, TJ McConnell of the Sixers got 4 votes for All-Star. What's his name? Ryan Archio, whatever his name is. Another little white guy on the Bulls. Archie.
Yeah.
5 votes for All-Star team.
This is a question I've been meaning to ask you because you're about to say Zaza Pachulia, and this goes back to a conversation. This is kind of an aside, but I've been dying to ask you this question. If you're picking Kawhi to beat the Warriors, are you pro Zaza now? Zaza, who kind of ended Kawhi's run in the West?
No, I'm pro Kawhi's revenge against Zaza Pachulia's old team.
Okay, that's fine. But
Like the
so he's
Warriors-
no longer wronging Kawhi because you were mad at Zaza for inflicting an offense onto Kawhi. Did he help Kawhi?
No, come on. We're not going down that path.
I thought I could try.
What I'm saying is that he can get revenge for the injury that Zaza inflicted as a member of the Warriors against the very Warriors team that Zaza was helping to catapult by dismantling the Spurs' entire franchise.
Okay, now that you're on record, I'm happy with that. But Zaza also gets All-Star votes. Sorry for the aside. As a joke.
But that's like from fans, though, because he's really popular in the Republic of Georgia, where he's from.
Oh, but
So
no players voted for him?
maybe a couple, but he doesn't get votes.
I thought it was a movement.
Moving the movement. Zaza says we're only into movements.
Is Zaza a double carb name, a carb-on-carb name?
Yeah,
It's the only one that exists in the NBA, right?
I think so. He's I interviewed him after that All-Star thing happened, and we were just kind of talking about his popularity in the Republic of Georgia and stuff like that. And I think the NBA has put these boundaries in place where there's fan votes, there's media votes, there's public votes to sort of level the field so you don't get like a bunch of Asians all voted for Jeremy Lin.
Easy, fucking easy. You
No, I
mean
think it was in there.
future champion
I'm
Jeremy
saying I
Lin.
think it was in there because of Lin.
Yes, or Yao Ming maybe.
Yeah, I think it was
Yeah.
that was part of it. They're like, we can't allow like massive countries who support a foreign player to just put them in the All-Star game.
Well, there was a threat, right? Like when Lin went to sign with Houston, there was rumblings that China at large was going to vote him to the All-Star game, which would probably like unseat Chris Paul, which is hilarious.
Right,
you
but
know?
that's what I mean. I think this architecture of having 3 different ways and they all kind of I forget the exact way that they're weighed.
Yeah.
But the players generally do an absolutely trash job of doing voting. So like I don't want to hear the players saying we should do it because they have an opportunity to show that they're serious about voting, and they are deeply, deeply unserious. They vote for their teammates, they vote jokes, and that's cool.
Can we vote
can't
for an
also-
electorate? Who is your elders of the players? I know there's the players union, but who are players you would put in to vote for other players?
That would be fair. If you had a
An electorate.
Algonquin council of players who could then say, okay, this is how we're going to do it. I think you have to take a rep from every team.
And then, it probably wouldn't be your superstar, even though that would be your first inclination.
Because you can't vote for yourself, and let's say you can't vote for yourself or anyone on your team.
And stars hang out with stars, man. You got to pick journeyman like Jeremy Lin. He's objective. He's got an abacus. I can say that. You can't.
He's got a big-ass calculator. But yeah, I would do it like that. Yeah, each team has 1 rep.
Yeah.
But you can't have all the players because they're just playing around.
Yeah, but there's no way else to do this, and this is like the frustration and the weirdness of all these lists is the hobby, right? Like we follow the NBA for this. Like there's no more than this. To be upset at this like malfunctioning would be a disservice to the whole hobby.
Absolutely. And it's designed to be a malfunction.
Yeah.
We want, and I say we, speaking as if I'm the NBA, but we want there to be arguments and debates. That's what this is for.
Definitely. Absolutely.
If you had a foolproof, smart method instead of a Baroque shitstorm.
Which is what college football had to determine who plays in bowls. That was an awful thing. A computer generated.
Yeah, you want this to be a total debacle.
Yeah, we want referees making mistakes. We want these lists to kind of be wonky. We want all-star voting to be weird. Like, this is what we debate about, right?
For sure. And I just want to make sure to anyone listening to this, we definitely don't care.
Yes. Oh, yeah. We should put that before every pod.
I know we've talked about this incessantly for the last 35 minutes, but we also don't care at all.
No, because
The
Mitchell
guys-
Robinson is first team everything.
We care about the nomenclature.
Yeah,
we care
yeah.
about the system. I do not care who's named an All NBA in the least. I couldn't even tell you. They announced it yesterday. I've already forgotten.
And we've gone on too long enough, but like next episode, I really want to talk about like how this affects like teams' plans moving forward, because these lists are like built into contracts now that they reward players for.
We're going to do that, and we'll talk about pig brains, and we're going to do a lot of that.
Finally.
In next week's episode. The last thing we could just bring up here, briefly here, and it's kind of tied to what Larry Nance was talking about.
Is it a Lakers player talking like a fool? It's weird. It's weird.
Josh Hart went on, I guess, the Gilbert Arenas radio show, podcast, whatever it is. It was on video, what I saw it. But Josh Hart, who's I want to say he's going to be a third-year shooting guard, small forward, good player.
I like him.
Solid. Plays
Had a
D.
down year, but good.
And he went on a sort of generic rant against analytics and saying that guys who, had never played basketball shouldn't.
Stick to sports.
Yeah, they
Or
should.
stick to math.
They shouldn't be giving any advice to guys who do this for a living and have spent their lives honing this craft. And I personally thought it was directed at Andrew Kuo. Like, to me, it was a direct.
Don't make me take off my giant abacus
It
calculator.
was a direct shot at
backpack.
Kuo and the terrible takes that you've been
And many terrible
just
takes.
subjecting the basketball audience to for, at this point, years.
I love Josh Hart, but thankfully he gave that take, right? Because there's no juice if everyone agrees on this. And like, it would be disappointing if Josh Hart came on Gilbert Arenas' show and was like level-headed, being like, you know what, I'm not really into analytics, but it helps a lot of teams. There's different ways to talk about it. Like, what numbers are we talking about? Because I like my contracts to be analytic. I like my performance to like reflect how well I'm playing. But to each their own. Instead, I'm so much more into him just being like, nerds.
I couldn't even tell who he was trying to roast.
Someone had hurt his feeling. Who hurt you, Josh?
Because it could have applied to members of the Lakers organization who said, Josh, you don't get to the foul line enough. You need to get to the foul line more. And that's the reason that your true shooting percentage went from 590 to 53%. Like, you were not an efficient player this season because you don't get to the line. And he's like, how dare you?
Maybe it was a shot at Magic Johnson because Magic is obsessed with like the corners of metrics in analytics worlds, right? And it's like every decision he makes, he's just like Rob Pelinka's there, just like squashing it, being like, my eyes don't lie.
Or is he mad at the media or fans? That was why I didn't think anyone
Or
could.
Gil.
I didn't think anyone could even take umbrage at what Hart said because it was so like paint by numbers, jock talking about nerds, where it's like, don't tell me how to do my job. And I was like, fair.
Yeah.
Fair. That's true. Don't tell him how to do his job. He's one of the best in the world at this. Like, as long as you're not going to point out who said what and what they actually said, you are totally justified in saying, you anonymous person who isn't good at basketball shouldn't tell me how to do basketball things.
Yeah.
Fair. I agree.
And we talk about this this net result of organizations being either smart or a desirable place to play. And ironically, LA and New York being super desirable places to play, are dumb, and places like Brooklyn no one wants to go to, but really smart, And when it all comes together, you get a really scary thing like the Houston Rockets or the Golden State Warriors, and I look at that in a player individual basis too. If you're smart and good, it's like, oh boy, we're dealing with like a guy's gonna have a 15-year career.
I also look at this situation as being more along the lines of the Lakers aren't explaining stuff to you, which is a commentary on the Lakers organization and why there's this sort of trickle down to a guy having that sort of reaction to the idea of, quote, analytics. Because I think if you asked PJ Tucker or Chris Paul or James Harden or most of those guys on that team about analytics, they wouldn't say that. They may not adjust their games analytically, but they would have an understanding that it's not this sort of vague jock versus nerd thing. It's more like, hey, you should shoot from here.
It's constructive criticism.
You're better from
Yeah.
this area. We're going to try to get you shots there.
Yeah.
It's not like, hey, your VORP is down. What's really good? It's like, well, we're trying to shoot more threes, so you should go to this spot because you shoot good there. And like, don't worry about like spotting up. Just pull off the dribble. It's cool.
Yeah. Can you imagine a Ramby? I don't know which Ramby, any Ramby, tearing themselves away from their videos on their phone and going to Josh Hart and be like, oh, hey, like respect to the way you feel about that, but like we use a lot of analytically generated information to make you a better player. And that's not everything. Like here's Magic Johnson or here's another Ramby that can tell you what winning feels like. But in the meantime, take more elbow jumpers.
I've seen interviews with, I want to say, Morey and some of those guys, and they talk about that translation. And is it Kurt Rambis saying?
Which Ramby?
Any of the Ramby, just one of the gifted Ramby, saying, oh, here's how you should play. This is what you're doing wrong. It's more about that communication of saying, our coach has to put these guys in positions where they can do what they do best. And maybe you don't want players to know where all their best spots are. If they're not the kind of guy who's...
That's weird to me. You want to know. You want to tell your players everything, right?
I don't know.
Oh, you make a good point because sometimes you don't want to. Like sometimes when I do studio visits, you don't want to tell. You don't want to talk about everything.
I guess my thing is like if you are running an offense and you say we want Eric Gordon to shoot more from the left side of the court, you have to have your coach translate that to him because otherwise maybe he doesn't take that shot from the right side.
Yeah.
And maybe he's like, wait, I know I'm better from the left. I don't want this shot. Or you say to someone, you're really bad at making this baseline jumper. So when they're there and they need to take that shot, they pass the ball up.
What's your take on it came out that Jason Kidd told Giannis not to shoot threes ever? What's your take on that?
Great advice.
Kind of, right?
It's great advice.
Yeah. People were dogging Kidd for that, but I was like, yeah, that's not Giannis' strength.
But
Those are bad shots.
they're bad shots.
Yeah.
It also depends on whether you think Giannis is developing into a capable three-point shooter, which he has not to this point.
No, it's really uneven.
In terms of development, if he's practicing threes and making them at a decent clip in practice and the on-court results are not catching up, then keep shooting because it's a skill set that maybe he has. If there isn't a improvement that is marked,
You need evidence.
then he shouldn't be taking him.
Right.
Or if you're worried about winning and not player development. That's the thing with when people talk about Simmons, like he should be taking that shot. No, the Sixers are trying to win games. They're trying to win a title. They have a bunch of all-stars on that team. It's not about Simmons proving that he can take a 14-footer and make 1 out of 3. You're trying to win basketball games and potentially win a title. Like
Sure.
your shot selection is dictated by effectiveness, not potential.
Although Budenholzer in the last few games has not dealt with spacing very well. Like they aren't guarding Giannis at all at the arc, but then Giannis just goes into a double team. It's just like there's not the right release valves out there. And whatever. I mean, we're talking about trees. But like,
One thing that Toronto has done really well is that I haven't seen a lot of teams do is they're meeting him a lot earlier with big defenders. They're not necessarily sagging into the paint. I mean, they are.
They are sometimes.
No, they're sagging into the paint, but they're coming up to meet him instead of letting him get that, like,
It's Kawhi, man. It's Kawhi.
maybe it's just Kawhi.
Yeah.
You know, maybe I'm talking about it being strategy when it's really like, no, we have Kawhi Leonard and we're going to put him on you, and you went from scoring 40 points per 100 possessions to 15 because it's Kawhi.
And this is Josh Hart's point, perhaps. It's like sometimes you have players that show you something else, like Kawhi Leonard, Draymond Green. I would almost assume that their coaches are just like, here's what I think you should do, but you know what to do, man. Read the play. You're my guy. And other players like, okay, you have to stand there. But I think Kerr to Draymond is like, read the play. You see it before I do. You're on the court. And Josh Hart responds to that.
Yeah, I just feel like Josh Hart most likely would not be opposed to the idea of analytics if you said to him, hey, Josh, you want to know where you make the most shots from? He'd be like, probably. Like, yeah, right here, this above the break on the right side, that's like your sweet spot. And he'd be like, I always kind of knew that.
Yeah.
Like, I always feel really good from that side. And like, where should I work on this summer? Like, the left baseline, that three, you know, you're only shooting 27% from there. And he's like, oh, that's good to know. I'm going to tell my trainer, like, let's really hammer down that left baseline three. And that can be something that I thrive at versus being a weakness. And he's like, thanks, dude. I appreciate that. And you're like, hey, what's up, motherfucker? That was analytics. Nerd.
Well, it's so interesting that like job security in coaching probably breeds successful behavior because you're not making decisions that maybe like can produce results that make you look better in the moment. And I think Josh Hart is a young player who has a bit of job security just because like he's going to have a long career in the NBA. So he's allowed to think that analytics are stupid because he's guaranteed a place at a seat at the table. The minute his physical capabilities start depreciating, or the minute he's looking at a contract and maybe not a lot of teams are interested, he's going to be like, how do I become a better player? It's like, oh, you're taking the shots that you're not good at. Just start taking shots you're good at.
And beyond that, do we really know if he's anti-analytics?
Like, what is he talking about with analytics?
We don't really know.
Like, nerds jump at this too fast, too.
It was so vague.
Myself included.
It was so vague. And
we like this.
If you were going to hire him and you were recruiting him and he was a free agent, you're going to bring this stuff up.
Yes.
And you're going to say, Josh, remember that interview when you were so hostile towards analytics and numbers? Like, are you dumb?
Or if you're Steve Mills.
Or were you just talking shit?
If you're Steve Mills, you're like, Josh, how badly do you want this?
Like, are you a winner?
Would you consider yourself a winner or a loser?
Are you like all 30 teams? Losers. To a man. Everyone loses. At the end of the day, you lose.
Yeah. Except us, because at the end of the day, we fucking win, man.
Because it's yet another perfect pot.
Swish.
Cookies.
Buckets.
I love
Cookies.
Cookies.
I love cookies.